Good afternoon, and welcome to our Fall 2021 XR Speaker Series. I'm Jeremy Nelson, and I'm the director of the Extended Reality Initiative at the University of Michigan. Our mission is to bring XR technologies for teaching and learning university-wide, both on campus and online. To support that mission, we want to create awareness and community around XR technologies and use cases. In thinking about this fall's speaker series, we wanted to feature perspectives from academia and thought leaders to discuss how XR is being implemented in the classroom and what our ethical responsibility is as we develop and deploy these technologies. Today's talk will be followed by a talk on October 20th titled XR for Higher Education, Experiential Design Affordances, Production Challenges, and Ethical Considerations with Kent Bai. On November 4th, Professor Michael Niebling and I will participate in a live discussion titled XR for Everybody. And then concluding on November 17th, we welcome Yulian Radu from Harvard to learn about lessons from designing augmented reality and collaborative learning. Today's discussion will start with a presentation from Dr. Lindgren and his graduate student James Planey, followed by a presentation from Dr. Rebecca Quintana. We'll leave about 30 minutes at the end for open Q&A discussion. So be sure to add your comments and questions in the chat throughout the presentation and submit questions via the Q&A section to help guide our discussion. You can help upvote those questions to help us prioritize the discussion. Now, I'm excited to welcome Dr. Robb Lindgren, an Associate Professor of Curriculum and Instruction and Educational Psychology at the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign. His research looks at the ways that embedded and immersive technologies can be designed to generate deep understanding, empathy, engagement, and can create new dispositions and identities that lead to learning in STEM. Robb is currently directing a cross-campus institute at Illinois called Technology Innovations in Educational Research and Design, or TIER-ED, where he gets to support new technology design initiatives on topics ranging from literacy in India to helping seniors make sense of their health information. Robb's passions have increasingly taken him to spending more time on the ways research on learning technologies can make an impact, so he is very happy to be joining us today and to talk about how XR can potentially transform learning in higher ed. Robb will be joined by one of his graduate students, James Planey. James is interested in how immersive technologies such as VR and AR can be meaningfully integrated into science classrooms instruction to support student learning as they engage with spatially complex science content. He is especially excited for the generative potential of XR in learning. And for his dissertation, James is focusing on student-generated drawings of science phenomena in VR, as they explore and reflect on the knowledge around the lunar phases. His research interests are influenced by his previous experience as a high school science teacher, NGSS curriculum designer, and informal nature educator. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Robb Lindgren and James Planey.
All right. Hi, everyone. Can I just get a quick thumbs up to know that you can see my slides? All right. I'm in presenting mode here. So welcome, everyone. Thanks. It's really nice to be here. I was excited to join this panel for a number of reasons. Well, A, I like the people that I'm presenting with. B, this is a topic that I really do care about, as Jeremy nicely said in the introduction, thinking about, real impactful ways that these kinds of technologies can be used in education. And thirdly, because we actually just collected a bunch of data on exactly this topic over the last few weeks. We got into some astronomy classrooms, both here and at a collaborating community college. And so we're kind of anxious to sort of get this, to get some of these experiences out there, to tell some of these stories, and to get some feedback from folks on this so that we know how we can move forward. So that was a great introduction. Thanks again, Jeremy. I think that covered well sort of who I am and the kind of work that I'm interested in. So I'll kind of jump in. So I care about these kinds of technologies a lot, but I don't care about them just because they're cool and they're new and they're immersive. They're all those those things, and I love them for that. But the reason why I really care about these kinds of technologies for education is because of their potential to transform the way that that learners of all types interact with educational content. And so my focus is really thinking hard about those kinds of interactions and ways that we can create better kinds of interactivity that affords the type of learning that we would like to see from students from of all ages. And so I over the last decade or so, I've really focused a lot on what is often referred to as embodied learning, which is thinking about sort of physical ways that people can interact with the content that they're trying to learn. And XR technologies are terrific for this. They create all sorts of new opportunities and affordances for having more physical kinds of engagement, whether that includes haptics and actually touching things, or simply being able to see things from the perspective of someone who has a body and interacting with it the way that you interact with things in the real world. So a lot of my work applies ideas from psychology and philosophy about the embodied nature of thinking and learning to the design of educational environments. And that's where it becomes, it goes from embodied cognition to embodied learning. And I roughly define that as sort of activity that affords reflection on connections between the movements, actions of the body, and target ideas in STEM and other domains. And it's that the connections between or the alignment between the physical actions that you are doing and what it is that you want to learn that is really important. And then also the reflecting on those actions. So we do so much movement in our regular life, but we don't think about that movement. We don't think about the meanings that we make with that movement, or the potential metaphors that are there for those movements and those actions. And that's, again, what I think these kinds of technologies are really powerful and able to do. So just a quick sort of rundown, what are sort of the big tenets of embodied learning? Expanding one's repertoire of movements and physical perspectives has the potential to expand thinking. So giving people new ways of moving or new ways of seeing is an opportunity to create new kinds of learning. And if you look at how people learn without these technologies, it is often through these very kinds of expansions, like moving in new ways or looking at problems in different ways leads to the robust kind of learning that we would like to see. A second tenet is that learning interventions need to consider the type and the quality of interactions that students have with the physical environment or with digital objects that allow for physical interaction. We put, I think, too much focus on just, oh, if it's hands-on, or if it's interactive, then it's good for learning. But it's a very superficial, way of looking and thinking about learning, that there are different types of interactions, different ways of being hands-on that lead to learning. But then there are other ways of interacting with things physically that may not lead to learning. And so we need to discern what are the advantageous ways of creating these kinds of experiences and interactions to promote learning. And that's really what I think embodied learning is all about, is making the difference between those, the more superficial and the more meaningful kinds of connections. And then third, a powerful approach to creating learning is through embodied experiences, to bridge embodied experiences with formal concepts through analogies and metaphors, and provide opportunities for reflection on those things. So let people do things with their body, but then let people see visualizations of what they have done so that they can reflect on those actions and make those meaningful connections. And so, the reason why I'm so excited about XR is, as I said, it is a great platform for allowing those kinds of actions and reflections in a lot of, I think, really creative ways. It can involve full body movement. It can involve just hand gestures. It can involve people acting as if they are elements of some system that they are trying to understand, participating in some simulation in a real sort of physical way. lots of really exciting things. But I would be remiss if I didn't point out that this doesn't mean that there aren't pitfalls here, that if we apply XR to all sorts of learning environments, that there won't be cases where things go horribly wrong. And I see a lot of examples of those things, and many of you probably have seen that too, where we take this wonderful piece of technology and create an educational experience that is anything but. One of my punching bags for this point that I like to make is this line of Connect based video games that came out a few years ago. There's been a number of these, but this one in particular, always gives me a chuckle. This is a child answering a multiple choice question with her feet by kicking a ball to the arithmetic answer that she has solved in her head. Probably not the best use of embodied movement or XR in this case. I think we can do better, and that's the purpose of the research that we're doing. So an extra special challenge, I think, to this design space of XR is this idea of collaborative embodied learning. So, it's hard enough, I think, designing good experiences for single individuals with, working with one device, making good use of their body movement and action, but also doing it in a way that that is inviting and meaningful for groups of people to work together using these kinds of devices is an extra challenge, but I think a super interesting challenge that many more people should be invested in trying to solve. I think this list that I've got here of potential issues with this could probably be about 5 times longer, but I just want to talk, briefly about some of the big ones. And, I saw some of these issues come up in the questions that were submitted for this panel beforehand. A lot of people like to talk about the expense of these kinds of technologies and the practicality of being able to use them at scale. I agree that this is an issue. Certainly they are really expensive technologies, but I'll let you in on a little secret, which is that if the expense of these technologies means that you can't deliver a headset to every child in a 30-person classroom, that's probably a good thing, because I'm not so sure that distributing all that technology in single user devices to a classroom full of children or adults is a good use of that technology. I think there's probably other ways that we can get people to work together, and I hope the project I'm about to talk about is an example of that. How to use devices designed for single use learning in collaborative activities. That's kind of the problem that really motivated this project. We know that these are powerful tools that give individuals' perspectives that can be incredibly insightful, but how can that work with the dynamics of small group learning, where you've got other people that won't be able to see necessarily exactly what you're seeing, but maybe they shouldn't see exactly what they're seeing. Maybe we can complement those perspectives in some way that actually leads to the kinds of synergies you'd want to see. And then the related question of how do you just orchestrate and structure collaborative activities in these platforms? I don't think that we've really come all that far in solving this problem. And I don't think that this project that I'm about to share with you necessarily does that either. But I think it gives us some ideas as to sort of what are some good ways of structuring collaborative activities with XR technologies that at least start taking us in a productive direction. So answering these questions, were really the impetus for the Connections of Earth and Sky with Augmented Reality, which is the CSER project, an NSF-funded project that for which we just collected a round of data a couple weeks ago. Now, I'm not going to talk about all these things in depth. I just want to highlight a few things about this project so I can hand it over to James, who's going to, give you the much more exciting component of this talk, which is going to include some demonstrations and some nice pictures. So we worked with community college partners on this, which was really important, I think, to bring them into the conversation. They educate a lot of students in these sort of core areas around, things like astronomy. As it happens, the only planetarium in our area of Champaign-Urbana is actually at the community college. And so, they had the opportunity to work with us and help us design these activities in a way that complemented their curriculum. We used, design-based research methods. We've gone in and out of these classrooms a lot, learning each time that we go into them about the design of these tools. Seeing new groups always gives us new insights as to what can happen. We're not going to talk a lot about this today, but we have been, we've got an expert here, Gina Kang, who is helping us think about the learning analytics, the way we take data from these experiences to inform, just how successful the groups were in terms of their collaboration, give us a sense of what aspects of the tool people are using and whatnot. I think that this is a really exciting area that is going to get a lot of research as well, is how do we use multimodal learning analytics to complement the research and the evaluation of these kinds of XR tools. And then, the whole goal is to ultimately come out of this project on the other end with some design principles that inform, teams that want to make activities like this in other areas. So we're now going to start talking a whole lot about astronomy, but I want you always to be thinking about ways that these kinds of tools could be used in a number of different areas, certainly within STEM, but I think even also outside of STEM. So thanks. With that, I'm going to hand it over to James.
Sure. I'm going to get my screen set up here. Can I get a chat verification? Everyone can kind of see what I've got there. Cool. Awesome. Thank you so much. So yeah, I'm James Planey. I'm a graduate student in Robb's lab, and Robb was right. I get the privilege of kind of showing you the flashy images and the demonstration of the system that we've got. I don't want to, as I go through the arc of this, I want to make sure, I want to emphasize that design-based research component that we've done. I'm showing you kind of the track to our final augmented reality prototype that we just did data collection on. But there were multiple rounds of feedback and testing. We did pen and paper testing before we even had access to technology around the task itself. We did some early work in VR, and then we finally were able to move into augmented reality. So just a little summary of where the project started. Our development collaborators were the Concord Consortium, and so we owe a huge amount of thanks to them for really getting the let out in terms of helping us do these bursts of development when we had opportunities to engage with these different technologies. So early on, we knew that we wanted to leverage an augmented reality system in a collaborative environment, but that technology wasn't available to us yet. The HoloLens 2 was access was very limited, privileged access. We sort of had the idea of what we wanted to do. And that's where we started in terms of simulating our system. So these are just a couple of shots. We used the Unity game engine to rough out the early interactions and establish the fact that we could get a star catalog in there. Our focus here is on an interactive simulation of the sky as they move around different locations on Earth. So these are just kind of early images of prototypes. The little looping video in the bottom right is, just a simulated interaction system. And early on, we knew we wanted to keep our user interface consistent across the different platforms that they would be engaging in the system with. And we'll have some better previews of that in just a second. So we are using the HoloLens 2 in terms of logistics with student groups. So we just put through about 150 students, I think, through the AR version of this system that I'm going to show you. And I kind of ask with every session that I facilitate or every class, who's engaged with VR before, who has engaged with AR. And in this form, as a headset, more of the, immersive tracked AR as opposed to something you might engage with on a phone platform. This was totally new for everyone. So not only were we engaging with new software, new technology, but this was a new interaction paradigm for everyone too. So that was really interesting to see the students get going collaboratively, but also get into this system and how they were using that and leveraging it. If you're not familiar with the HoloLens 2, it does have a sort of set of frameworks for how you interact with that holographic content. And we leveraged these frameworks in the design of our system in terms of being able to touch and activate holograms in space, pinch and move things around, or do these remote tap gestures like you see on the bottom here. So selecting items and doing those interactions on objects that are outside of your immediate touch distance. And so with the Caesar AR tool, we knew we wanted to have this accessible on both a tablet environment and in augmented reality. And we had a lot of sort of design goals here with the focus on being able to collaborate and show each other's work, thought process within the system. So I'm going to show you, we have a couple different representations of both the Earth and the night sky as they go through the system. They can manipulate their location, their time. If you've ever engaged with a simulated planetarium like Stellarium, a lot of the functions are very similar there. They have the ability to annotate the sky, and they share a common location database and the ability to look around at each other's locations. In terms of a static comparison between the systems we just leveraged during our data collection, you can take a look at this figure. So there's 3 primary ways they can interact with this content. There's what we call the horizon view or star view, where they're situated looking up and the night sky from a first-person perspective. We have the celestial sphere view, which acts as sort of the larger catalog of constellations and used for reference and location. And then we have the Earth view, which is used looking from an orbital view down on the Earth and used for custom locations and for part of the problem-solving portion of the task that we designed. So I'm going to actually pop in real quick just to show you what this looks like. This is the system on the tablet is accessible via the web. It's WebGL based. So you can log into a system. We're using a similar sort of scheme to Google Docs in terms of picking a username. And you can see here, I have access to the sky. If I select stars, it'll actually identify the star, the constellation it belongs to. If I want to draw attention to that, I can actually annotate the night sky. And what's nice about this is that not only do the annotations persist if I advance time, so I can make annotations and monitor that shift as time or location changes. Like I said, it's also networked. So you can see down here, I'm yellow otter, but there's also green crow here. They might be engaging with another part of the sky in another part of the world. I can click them and it will always take me to where they are and what portion of the night sky they're actually looking at. And you can see my annotations are actually visible there, but the representation is shifted because I'm on a different part of the globe in a different location. There's a lot of other stuff going on here. But just know that that's the primary way they're interacting with this content using touch tablets. And then the other way is through the HoloLens 2. So this is a quick video just showing you what I did, but using those AR hand gestures. So logging into the system, again, you're able to use those sort of distance tap or sort of air tap gestures. Once you look around the night sky, you can manipulate your info panels, which we've kept the arrangement of those consistent through the tablet and the AR version right now. You can directly interact with a lot of these buttons to select different modes and then select stars. So just like I was doing on the web interface, you can pull up a star, it'll highlight the constellation that it's a member of, and then you can actually annotate or outline. When you select a new star, that current selection is updated. So if you want to keep a persistent marker of where that constellation is, you can sketch that out like they're doing here. And all of this is updated live across all of the group users. As long as you're in the same group, like alpha, beta together, you share that information. Same thing with kind of working on moving or determining where you are on the globe in the Earth view. You see everyone's pins when you're working on this collaborative system. And I will say, you'll come up with this a lot. This is sort of a composite simulated view. of what you see in AR. So the perspective is a little bit shifted, and some things look more solid than you would actually in the system itself. And then this is the sort of larger star catalog. You can look all around. There's no restriction with the horizon cutting off where the stars are rendered, and they're able to look around the night sky there. So that's the system itself. I just briefly wanted to go through like what's actually motivating their interaction with it. And Rob mentioned this a little bit, but we were super privileged to have a lot of buy-in this year from our community college instructors and from our on-campus astronomy instructors. Over the iterations that we've done, we've developed this problem-solving task called Lost at Sea, where each group is actually given a mystery location in the system that does not give them access to latitude or longitude, but just the night sky. And they need to work to identify stars, constellations, to determine the hemisphere they're in, figure out the cardinal directions, kind of orient themselves, with the idea being this is a space capsule that's splashed down in an unknown location. And then using that knowledge plus knowledge from their course or supplemental material, because we do this with different sort of levels of knowledge here, actually figuring out the latitude and longitude of where they are. So in terms of what that looks like in action, we did do our fall enactment. Like Rob mentioned, we just wrapped up. And we actually had courses for, we actually had them for 3 sessions each. So they came to us for 3 weeks, 1 session. With our community college, it was a 2-hour session each time. And with our on-campus UAUC students, it was a 50-minute session. So there was a little bit of difference there, but we were able to do an introduction to the technology, then a curriculum aligned season lab, which was that instructor's traditional seasons lab, but modified to leverage our technology as opposed to maybe a different platform they had used. And then finally, they used our Lost at Sea task. And so what does this look like in action? We were able to capture the headset streams from all of the VR headsets. We did screen capture from all of the tablets, and then we also did video and audio recording for all of the tables. So we've got a mountain of data that we're now kind of catching our breath and getting ready to think about how we want to digest and move forward. But just a glimpse of what this looks like in action. This is at the community college in their astronomy classroom. So you can see groups here working on the tablets, and also having this student is actually discussing, kind of trying to measure the height of a star above the horizon and gesturing to kind of communicate what data point they're trying to capture there. So we did see some interesting instances like that. We saw some this is the productive collaborative work around the Lost at Sea task. So you see they've got these maps, sort of reference materials about like how is latitude and longitude displayed, and some of our other task materials that they're leveraging while they engage with the digital system. And then again, this is at the university setting, we were able to bring them into our data collection space. There's the stripes on the wall are intentional, because if you ever do HoloLens implementations, make sure you don't have just giant white voids in the room, because the stripes help a lot with tracking. So in terms of these students are looking at the same constellation in the night sky, so just kind of showing off the networked aspect there while they engage with the HoloLens user, and they can get verification that they're looking at the same place. And then often the system was used as sort of a public artifact, either just to collaborate around the tablet itself. This is an example of just sort of annotating and drawing in the system as they're keeping track of a constellation over time. Opening up the sort of discussive possibilities. One of the things with our pilot in VR that we saw a big shift in with AR is staying engaged with your group and maintaining those discussions as you worked and engaged with the system. And then finally, this sort of hybrid interaction. We saw some interesting things where groups would set up their tablet, have the VR user right there, and kind of use the combination of those to either help synchronize what the AR user was doing while they were interacting and keeping everyone on task, as opposed to just 2 individuals on tablets. They were set up more as like a public representation of their work and their progress. And so, like I said, this is a lot of team work went into this. And so, yeah, it was Parkland College, Concord Consortium, Middlesex Community College is another community college out in the Boston area that Concord is engaged with, and some of their instructors. And so right now we've got a lot of sort of boots on the ground experience getting this stuff collected. And yeah, we're kind of in that fun situation now where we get to think about what we want to look at going forward, what we've enabled through these interactions, and how we can facilitate that better, especially through design, not just of the task, but through the interface design and things like that.
With the remaining couple of minutes,
yeah.
James, do you want to maybe situate this work a little bit in terms of the other XR activities happening on our campus, and say a little bit about your work?
Oh, sure. Yeah. Yeah, I can do a shameless plug. Thanks, Rob. Yeah. So yeah, this is part of a larger initiative now, just kind of a naturally occurring initiative on campus where we're starting to have more headway into facilitating these interactions. So, you know, with Caesar having the tablet access and the AR access as a kind of mixed technology group, there's another project on campus called the Komodo Project, which is working on developing a flexible framework, web-based VR framework for instructional deployment. So you would have your VR content, you can schedule like class sessions in this, it's networked and collaborative, and it's also accessible again via a web interface, sort of flat screen. You can see, you obviously not the same degree of interaction, but you can see and work with people in that system. And so I'm taking my interests in drawing representations of science ideas. So like how they sketch, how they move from their traditional representations of the lunar phases is my specific area of interest right now. And starting to look at how different students start to represent that with the affordances we see in VR now, the ability to change scale dynamically, move objects around, use the space around them to organize their idea, and just look at the diversity of how those students are inputting that. So it's in the sort of prototype phases now, but one of the things we're really excited about is the ability to collect this data. And like on this slide, I'm showing you first person screen capture from the screen, but one of the things about Komodo that's going to be really nice is we can take all the log data from that system and reconstruct these drawing learning sessions after the fact, but with the ability to kind of view the drawing dynamically, like rendered real time. So we have multiple perspectives as we kind of look at how they're drawing and where they're situating themselves. So this is sort of an early pilot implementation of that. As a researcher observer, you can be listening to the audio and actually watching and moving through their sketch as they do that. And I will say that the Komodo system's ultimate goal is that this work is public and available. So you can go to that link. The different implementations are available on GitHub, and you can actually contact them to get updates and access to the system as it matures a little bit more.
Ooh, I think we're on the nose with time.
Yeah.
But back to you, Jeremy.
Thank you so much. That was great. Really, really exciting work and interesting. We're seeing some questions pop in. We'll hold those till the end. We want to give Rebecca time to chat. So I'm happy to welcome Dr. Rebecca Quintana. In her role as Associate Director of Learning Experience Design at the University of Michigan's Center for Academic Innovation, Quintana leads a team that uses learning-centered approach to create online learning experiences for diverse audiences of global learners. Quintana is a co-director of the Learning Experience Design Graduate Certificate Program, a joint collaboration between U of M's School of Education and the Center for Academic Innovation, where she oversees students who are engaged in a 2-semester residency program. At the start of the pandemic, Quintana led the creation of a massive open online course, a MOOC, on resilient teaching to support educators during the pandemic. In the winter of 2021, Quintana developed and taught a course at U of M called Educational Applications of Augmented and Virtual Reality, where students don Oculus Quest headsets and participate in classroom activities virtually. Quintana is also a member of the Diversity Scholars Network and the National Center for Institutional Diversity, and a faculty affiliate with the U of M's Digital Studies Institute. Welcome, Rebecca.
Thank you so much, Jeremy, for that warm introduction. And thanks to Rob and James for their excellent presentation, which I greatly enjoyed. I'll be looking forward to revisiting the recording of that as well, just to see all of that again and to hear all of that again. It was really, really interesting. I'm going to now share my screen. So we'll just make sure that's looking okay. Just a moment here. So just want to make sure that you all can see it. If I could get another quick thumbs up. Thank you, everyone, for that. So as Jeremy mentioned in my introduction, I was able to teach a course in educational applications of augmented and virtual reality in the winter of 2021. So that is what I will be sharing with you this afternoon. And the particular focus of today's discussion will be on creating opportunities for social learning in augmented and virtual reality. My particular focus will be on virtual reality today, as that is how our course was taught. But I will certainly be building on some of the ideas that Rob and James shared with us all earlier. Oops. So just a little bit of context here. So the talk today will be about sort of a more practitioner-focused discussion of what it's like for an instructor to use virtual reality, XR technologies in their classroom for learning. And so I'll be sharing a vignette with you, I guess, a design vignette of one course with a particular focus on social learning. So just a little bit of context on the course. First of all, it was offered through the School of Education at the University of Michigan. And it was a 1-credit course. We were sort of just getting going with the idea of the course, and we thought it would be a good idea to pilot it over 7 weeks rather than develop a 3-credit course right away. And coincidentally, it was also accepted to be part of the XR certificate program at the University of Michigan. So students enrolled in that particular certificate were able to count this course toward the earning of that certificate. So as a result, we did have students from all across campus participate, certainly from the School of Education, but also from the School of Information, School of Public Health, and many other places as well. So it was a wonderful collection of students who came with diverse perspectives and experiences that were able to inform our learning together. It was a graduate level course, and also we were fortunate enough to have access to 25 Oculus headsets through the XR initiative at the University of Michigan through the Center for Academic Innovation, led by Jeremy. So we're very, very grateful for the opportunity to explore this particular technology through the loan of those headsets. Oops. I should also mention that the course, as you can imagine, was situated right in the middle of the pandemic. So it really wasn't possible for us to meet together in a face-to-face setting. The course was conducted entirely online, but we were able to have students check out those headsets from the library. And in some cases, we had to send students headsets if they weren't located in Ann Arbor, if they didn't happen to be living in Ann Arbor that semester. We had to make arrangements to have those shipped to students, and then we had to have shipping labels printed to have the headsets come back to us. So just sort of another example of all of the support, logistics, thought that really needed to go into something like this, even for a 1-credit course, to make it possible. So we did have 2 driving questions for the course, and our goal was really to investigate some of the claims that are made about the potential for XR technologies to support learning. And whenever there is a new educational technology introduced, very often we hear claims about this particular technology is good for learning. You might even hear claims like this technology would better support learning than other types of technologies, or no technology at all. So we really wanted to conduct a critical examination of some of the claims that are made about the potential for XR to support learning. And then we wanted to take a scholarly approach. We wanted to examine evidence from scholarly literature, like the type that Rob and James are producing as part of their work, as well as our own experiences with the technology, and really having opportunities to reflect on that in order to really understand whether the claims that are made can be supported or whether they should be refuted. So when I mention about claims, we divided our course into 4 topics or 4 themes related to these claims. So one is about representation. And in the XR space, we certainly are able to explore different types of representations, spatial arrangements. We can have layers of information, just like we saw earlier this afternoon, layered on top of physical spaces, digital spaces. And so what does it mean for learning when we have all of those representations together in one space, in one learning environment? And can that actually support learning? Another theme we looked at was this idea of identity and being able to explore our own identities, perhaps, identities of others, taking on new identities in a virtual reality setting. We certainly have anonymity in ways that we may not have in physical spaces. So this idea of really using the technology to explore that theme. And I think Rob may have mentioned this a little bit earlier as well, but the theme of empathy and to what extent can immersing oneself in a digital physical environment foster empathy? Can it do that? We've heard the phrase, walking in the shoes of another, but is it really a technology that can help us think in more empathetic ways? And then finally, the question of social learning. Can we actually have improved collaboration in these immersive digital spaces? Throughout the pandemic, we've all been collaborating through technologies like Zoom and that sort of thing, but can we, through being co-located in the same physical space, actually have an improved collaborative experience? So I want to state from the outset that, the theme I'm going to be focusing on is social learning, but the entire course was really premised on this notion of community-oriented instruction. And this is something that I always share with students at the beginning of any course, whether it be this XR course or any course that I might teach. And it's this sort of shared goal of creating or fostering a collective knowledge building approach in the work that we do. So even though I had advanced sort of these 4 themes that I mentioned, we wanted to sort of explore those together and really ask genuinely, to what extent can these claims be backed up? And this was our charge as a knowledge community during the course. We talk also about active learning or active social processes. And I will show in a moment sort of how we tried to do that even beyond the XR experiences or the wearing of the headsets, but actually in other ways throughout the course. And Rob mentioned this earlier as well. It's not enough just to sort of create the environments of, immersive learning or putting people together in a room to have a discussion, so knowledge sharing, but it's really important to put the structures in place that allow for effective knowledge building, knowledge construction, knowledge advancement as a community. So I'll show you in a moment a little bit more about how I thought about that. This focus on collective progress, so really thinking through, where is it that we've come from in terms of what we understand as a community, where are we still trying to go, and searching out the resources that will allow us to make progress together. I also want to emphasize this idea of including the voice of the learner in any course design. I think it's very important to build in space for that. So we did that. We made sure that the syllabus had room in it for an emerging theme that students wanted to explore. And it came to be apparent very quickly that students were interested in exploring questions of equity and access with respect to the technology. So we did kind of a deep dive into that particular topic throughout the course, but also focused on it in 1 week. So I will show you now how we tried to sort of create an entire environment that allowed for this dynamic knowledge construction. So what you're seeing here is Gather Town, which was a digital space that I created for this particular course. I hope this doesn't make anyone too dizzy watching it. It's just playing on a loop there. But essentially, the space itself had different knowledge artifacts in it, and those would change every week according to the theme. I would change them. I would often ask for input from students to inform what would be placed on digital posters. Sometimes it might be an aggregate of student ideas from the week before, that type of thing. We had interactive whiteboards that students could respond to questions that I might pose. And then, this is just an example of one person in the space, but when multiple people are in the space, as they got closer together, they could have a conversation with each other through video conferencing. So this idea of really creating a sort of social space for learning, a dynamic space. And then also you might catch a glimpse of different fireplaces throughout. So we had these fireside debrief chats at the end of each class after experiencing our VR technology to really allow us to debrief and discuss together, kind of reflect on our immediate impressions. So that's GatherTown. So we're going to focus now on social learning, as I mentioned, and I just want to sort of share a few ideas about that. So as I mentioned, the participant structures are very important, and I'll be showing an overview of how we did that. Generally, though, we would try to have opportunities for what we call free exploration. Students could walk around the GatherTown space. Then they would go away from their laptops and put on their headsets and experience a VR application pertinent to that particular week. And then they'd come back and we'd have a debrief session. So that's sort of generally how we structured our interaction with each other. Of course, during the pandemic, we made sure to have lots of opportunities for both synchronous and asynchronous discussion throughout Canvas. So always kind of continuing that conversation, and actually on Slack as well. And this idea of community supported, I mentioned the support needed before, but through the Center for Academic Innovation, we were very fortunate to have Jeremy's team and members of the LXD team who were able to sort of support all of the materials that needed to be generated, in terms of documentation for using the technology. The students were on their own in their homes or wherever they lived to actually figure out how to maybe load software onto their devices, how to get things working. So it was really a community effort to make this happen. So we're going to focus now on collaboration, and one class in particular that used collaboration. But before we do, I'll just mention that, all of the technology, all of the applications that we used in the course were, for the most part, except for the first one there, Under the Skin, commercially available. So as an instructor, and there were more than this, but here are just some examples. I searched out things that were available for download, where people, didn't necessarily have to purchase anything, and really use those as the materials to help us explore our questions, the things that we were inquiring about throughout the course, the themes. The first one there, though, Under the Skin, was developed through the XR initiative at the Center for Academic Innovation, and it was an example of an individual activity. So students putting on a headset, kind of in the middle of the class, after the knowledge exploration and before the debrief, putting it on and just experiencing it on their own. So in this case, it was a simulation of chemotherapy treatment, and the user plays the role of a health practitioner who is examining a patient or two patients who have recently received chemotherapy treatments, and sort of using the app to ask questions through a branching structure of the patient, suggesting treatment possibilities, examining the site of the treatment, as well as this opportunity to go under the skin, which was, again, another type of representation at the cellular level. So that was the application that we used to explore that particular topic. The work of Dr. Michelle Abersold from the Center for Academic Innovation at the University of Michigan. Apologies. So an example there of an individual application, and then also on the other side, group. So anytime we wanted to actually interact with each other in one digital space, we used these two applications, spatial.io, which was more about business meant for business collaborations, I think. There's whiteboards, sticky notes, that type of thing, of productivity. And then altspace.vr, which some of you may have heard of, which is really meant for, I think, just social interaction. And there's all kinds of events that happen there, but we did have our own space for the class specifically in altspace.vr. So collaboration, I often go back to this particular definition by Rochelle and Teasley from 1995. It's a great definition. Collaboration is a coordinated synchronous activity that is the result of a continued attempt to construct and maintain a shared conception of a problem. So it's more than just cooperation. It's more than sort of splitting up a task, having students go off and complete those individual parcels and come back and put it together. It's really an activity that requires dependency on each other, sustained focus, probably some negotiation around problem solving and how to approach a problem. This idea of synchronous activity was certainly something we were able to do with the VR technology. I wonder if it has to be synchronous, if collaboration can also be asynchronous, but in this definition, it is synchronous. And this was the definition that we shared with the students before we went into the AltVR space, altspace.vr. I just wanted to show you this. It's kind of a visual overview of the structure of the course. We have sort of higher levels of immersion at the top and lower levels of immersion at the bottom in terms of the different technologies that were used. Certainly, the Gather Town would have been on the lower side of things. But I wanted to show you that we did pretty much throughout the entire course create options for students, duplicate options, so alternatives essentially. So, you know, if students wanted to, or if they're internet bandwidth allowed, they could use spatial.io through their Oculus Quest, but we always made sure to show students how they could alternatively access it through a web browser or a phone if necessary, always making sure that there were multiple ways to engage. And then we also made sure to build in breaks, you know, the sheer sort of weight of the headsets, eye strain, that type of thing, really did come into play. So we had to make sure that we didn't, you know, put too much into a class. And that's a short break, but students could take a longer break if they needed to. They could leave spatial earlier. So the first part of the class was a lecture on the topic of collaboration. Then they went into a collaborative problem solving activity, which I'll share in a moment. And then we went back into the GatherTown space, examined some artifacts, and then debriefed in our fireside debriefs. So this is what spatial.io looked like when we had our lecture. You can see the students there. You might see a few other objects like these dogs here. Those were actually just objects that students could create and add to the space at will, post-it notes, that type of thing. And this was sort of like a lecture hall that I chose as the background. You can choose different settings. And, you know, for some students, this was the first time that they had been in a university lecture in the sense of a physical space. Since, you know, they may have started their degree in the fall of 2020. And so for some students, this was actually a very powerful experience to be together in this one space. And so, you know, as it turned out, I actually had internet issues and was sort of kicked out of the space. So I was able to join through my computer. That's why I'm there in a video. But, you know, this was kind of an interesting experience to, even though it was just a simple lecture, to be able to physically be co-located in one room together. But the next thing we did was, you know, I needed to think as an instructor, what can I do with spatial.io that will create an opportunity for students to experience collaboration in this virtual reality setting? So, you know, the actual perhaps topic of what they were collaborating on was maybe a little less important in this case than it might be in other educational settings. But the idea was, let's give them a problem to solve, a shared problem of interest that they need to interact with each other, in a physical way, in sort of ways that matter spatially, in order to experience collaboration in virtual reality. So I created these two types of problems, a word problem and a math problem. Students could choose either one depending on their preference. And I won't keep this on too long because it will make you dizzy, but this is how the word problem looked. And essentially what it was they just came into the room. There wasn't really much explanation of what to do, but if they observed carefully, they could see that the E, for instance, of chocolate is bolded, and then they could realize, oh, those are the letters we need to pay attention to, and they could rearrange the letters, the shapes to spell a word. So they were actually able in spatial to move things around and kind of see things that way. And similarly with the math problem, again, I won't keep it on there too long. We had a series of math problems, and the answers to which at the bottom formed the coordinates of a location. So in this case, it was Barcelona. But again, not a lot of explanation given. Students just went into the room and they had to work closely together to kind of figure out the answer to the problem. When they were finished, they could come back into the other space, into the lecture hall. But as an instructor, it was wonderful to be able just to go from room to room, similar to a Zoom breakout room, but to really be able to sort of see what the students were doing, look at the sticky notes, see how they were arranging things, to understand how they were approaching the collaborative problem solving activity. Yeah, so here are just some of our debrief discussion questions at the end of that particular activity, just asking them to reflect on the affordances of the technology, their experience with collaboration, particular features or design elements that allowed them to collaborate. Students did recall that there was actually no shared whiteboard in spatial, so there were sticky notes, but there was no way for two students to contribute to the same artifact, which was something that they felt was a hindrance. So just sort of reflecting on, how the technology allowed them or did not allow them to make progress. And then just before I close, I wanted to share this animated GIF here of, this is the University of Michigan Diag. And for some students, we did have an opportunity for students to come visit this as part of the class. So we were all there together. That's just me for this video, but it was part of the XR Summit that Jeremy and his team created. And, for some students, this was the first time they had ever been on campus at the University of Michigan. It was through VR, but, some students were not even located in the United States at the time. And so for them, it was a really powerful experience to be in this space with each other, with their classmates, being able to see spatially where different buildings were located, having a real sense of place. And also, we took selfies together and that kind of thing. And for some students, that was a real highlight, I think, of the course, but also perhaps of their semester. So just another example of how, these technologies, although, the devices might mostly be designed for single use, individual use, there are ways that we can use them to create opportunities for social learning, even with commercially available software. So I hope that paints a picture for you of what was our course from last semester. And I look forward to the discussion that's coming up.
Thank you, Rebecca. That was great. It was a fun process for us and our team to help support you and the students and the learners and kind of show off some of the work our students had done and our team at the XR initiative. Well, I see a couple questions in the chat for Rob and James. Maybe we'll start there and then open it up as other folks have questions. Feel free to drop them in the Q&A or the chat. So quick question here. Do people who have trouble with VR headsets due to motion sickness have an easier time in AR since it is more grounded in reality? Rob, James, thoughts on that? What you
Yeah,
see?
I'll start and then maybe I'll pass it over to James because I'm sure he has some thoughts on this too. I mean, I think the question of VR versus AR is a really interesting one that goes beyond motion sickness. I mean, I feel like I've experienced motion sickness in both, so I think it kind of depends a lot in terms of the kinds of activities that you're presenting, the kinds of interactions that you're asking. People to have. I think that the groundedness of AR is can help with the motion sickness. I think it does, sort of remind people that they are in sort of a real physical space, despite what is being shown to them in the augmented view. But I think the grounding actually helps more so in the sense that it reminds people that at least in this case, they are part of a physical group that is working together on a problem, right? So, something that we saw with the VR version is that, sometimes the person in the VR headset would, understandably get sort of, swept away in the visuals that they were experiencing and not be anchored in the activities of the group. Whereas it was a little bit harder to ignore sort of your group members when they were sort of still within your viewpoint, even if their faces were covered in stars. So I think I'm definitely not here to say like, I think AR is always better. We should always do AR. I think there are definitely places where it would be better. And I think Rebecca's example is terrific, where it's especially if you can create a shared space within VR. I think that there are really compelling applications for it. But I do think in certain environments, and we found in this case that the groundedness of the AR technology is helpful. And we were, as James knows, we were chomping at the bit to get the technology to be able to do the AR interactions because we could taste it. We knew that it was going to be better in the AR experience. It was just, we just waited so long for the HL2s to come out. Did I miss anything in there, James?
My only add-on to that is in terms of, like Rob said, it's more than just motion sickness, but having the actual classroom reference and your peers did unleash a couple design limitations that we had to consider with the VR prototype in terms of exposing them to that entire star sphere. If you're in that and you're looking around stationary, it's still in VR, that's pretty good. But the minute you try to rotate that or manipulate it and the whole sphere is rotating around you, that we limited access to that in the VR prototype because of issues with disorientation, and we didn't want to exacerbate that. In AR, we didn't, just anecdotally anyway, when working with the students, we didn't run into any issues with them making those large manipulations of the representations they were looking at.
Cool. Yeah, and we've seen similar kind of in our work at the XR Initiative. Well, I'll jump around the questions here a little bit. One question around, curious about the thoughts from the astronomy teacher at the community college that usually teaches this without XR. What did they think? How did it compare?
Yeah, we experienced a real range. I think we had three primary instructors that were working with us on this, and you could almost sort of see the spectrum across the three of them. We had one who was really keen to sort of try it out, and really kind of investigate the affordances of the AR technology, and so much so that we were able to trust this instructor to actually design the activity that the students would be doing with the Seasons Lab, because he had gotten so familiar with it. And so in that case, it was a lot of enthusiasm. I think for him, it was just a novel and another way to get across these ideas that frankly, I don't think he felt like he could necessarily do with the tools that they had limited. Others instructors, I wouldn't really characterize anybody as being resistant, but I think that there was definitely some apprehension around how it sort of fit in with everything else that they were doing. A couple of these instructors had used a software platform pretty reliably to teach these concepts previously, and here we are coming in saying like, we want you to try doing this. And they're different, right? They are different in terms of I think in some cases ours was better. I think in other cases to show specific concepts, theirs, the one that they had been using previously did it better. So, it required them to make some changes. I think that it was interesting to reflect on sort of the effect of points and like what, if you were doing this as part of a lab and getting points for it, there was sort of less of a willingness from the instructors to sort of let the students use these kinds of tools. And I think that that's a bias with these kinds of tools that I think we all need to kind of confront a little bit, right? Like when are these tools going to sort of get beyond the threshold of being extra credit activities to become just part of how we expect people to engage with technology and normal teaching and learning activities? And so, I think we had some small victories there, but by no means did we win the war. I think that there are still some hesitancy to that kind of transition.
Oh, that makes sense. The next question, Dr. Quintana. In the VR collaborative learning, did you see the same dynamic emerge that you typically see in group activities, where leaders and followers emerge, or did participation seem more equal among students, or no difference?
I mean, this is purely anecdotal, and remember that I was kind of jumping from room to room, so I wasn't able to just purely observe, and we didn't record anything or anything like that. But I would say it was similar. There were certainly some students who were more actively engaged in, moving objects around and kind of leading the discussion, the effort for like, hey, what should we do next? And there were certainly other students who were just a little bit quieter, kind of standing at the periphery. So from my observation, I would say it was similar to what you might expect in any type of collaborative activity. Students did mention that they had a sense of like people being near them. And I think they found that motivating, like to realize like maybe in a Zoom call or something like that, where we're all kind of, for lack of a better word, flat, and someone's standing right next to you, you might have a sense of like, oh, I should respond to that person, or I should, maybe try to initiate something. It's difficult though, in some sense, because there's no facial expressions, at least not yet. So, you can maybe nod, or you kind of have to like over communicate in a way, I noticed, and it can be exhausting, right? Because, those nuances of communication where you might make eye contact or quick nod are not really there. So people sort of have to maybe overact in a sense to have the same effect. But I know the technology is probably developing, and soon we will be able to raise eyebrows and things like that in virtual settings. But yeah.
With our meta-humans, we're seeing that a little bit. Next question, I think it's open for everyone. Are there general principles, concepts that learning designers should keep in mind as a way of fostering embodied learning in AR/VR?
Yeah, this is a great question. I mean, it's kind of my career, so I'll try to keep this brief and answer just a couple of things. I mean, one of the things that I really think hard about whenever I sort of take the foray into creating one of these experiences is I really try to think about body movement and body action as a limited resource, and not something that you should just sort of frivolously, ask people to engage with. And the only way I think to really bring down the cost of using that limited resource is to make it meaningful and to make it purposeful. And so really asking that, if you're going to have people, to make a gesture or to move through a space to sort of see something else, there needs to be meaning behind that movement. I mean, you wouldn't ask a student to walk repeatedly across a classroom, right, to perform something that they could easily do at the desk. And I don't think we should view VR spaces any differently. Like we should really be thinking hard about what we're asking them to do and how to make meaningful connections between those actions and what it is ultimately we want them to understand about this domain that we've sort of introduced them to. That's for me the number one thing. I mean, I think there are lots of sort of micro principles and guidelines that can be tailored to different different content areas, but I think that purposeful and meaningful alignment with body actions is kind of my number one.
That's great.
Yeah, I would definitely second that. I would also say, and I think it's related, this idea that everyone needs to have something consequential to do in any type of learning situation. So observing others can certainly be one way of learning, but I think it's important that when you're designing an experience, any type of learning experience, that you're really always considering, well, does everyone in this learning situation have a consequential role? Is there, are they going to see themselves and their ideas represented in this space? Are they going to see themselves as being consequential to the learning experience? So I think it's quite related to what Rob was saying, but just making sure that not only are we judicious about what we're asking students to do, but also are we ensuring that, they're doing something consequential and they know what they should be doing. They probably shouldn't be asking themselves, why am I here? What am I supposed to be doing right now?
Those are great. Thank you. Next question. This is for Dr. Quintana, but maybe wide open. How did you get around the Facebook login for the Oculus Quest headsets? How do students sign in and share? I'm happy to take this if you want.
Jeremy, that'd be great, because I think you'll have a more robust answer.
In this case, luckily we had Oculus Quest 1s, and so we were still able to log in with an Oculus account. So we had some accounts that were logged into the devices. So the students didn't log in with their own personal accounts. So we were fortunate when we bought the Quest. The Quest 1 was out, so we're good on that track for another year or whenever Facebook decides to shut that down. But we've engaged with their Oculus for Education group. We're trying to, with a number of other institutions, talk with them about what options they have. This is really a barrier for any content that we deliver to students requiring them to log in with a Facebook account is really kind of a non-starter, at least from a data security, data protection issue. And if you're interested in learning more about that, please join our next session on October 20th, where we'll talk with Kent Bai about ethical guidelines and standards that are happening in the industry to try to help influence policy and what the large vendors do. Any other?
Yeah, I don't. The only added layer to that is we also benefit from having purchased Quest 1 headsets, which don't require that login. But as a former educator and a researcher, I do think, and Jeremy, I'm glad you mentioned that with the next session coming up. It's a huge issue because, the motivations behind a lot of the technology that is really unleashing these embodied interactions have different motives around entertainment, media consumption, not necessarily completely aligned with what we want to do. And we're, with our Caesar stuff, we were just very much beholden to Microsoft's priorities about who was a worthwhile client to engage in order with early on, and trying to convince them that we want to do meaningful research and please give us access to some headsets. And so, yeah, it's a dynamic that's not going to go away. And unfortunately, the companies right now that have the resources to really get a critical mass and exposure of some of this tech out there want your personal data too while they're doing it. So, I find that a really interesting issue right now.
Yeah, we were hot on the trail of Pico, and then TikTok just bought them, and so these social media companies seem to be all converging on this space. So it's
There's
a challenge.
rumors of a wireless Valve headset. So
That would
early
be
on,
great.
so we'll see. Yeah.
We just for our lab purchased the Vive Focus 3.
Cool. Okay.
Which is nice, but it's at a cost point that's about 4 quests, so it becomes a money issue then. Great. Let's see. A couple more questions here. What are the main ways of designing for younger people, young kids, differ from designing for older students or adults? Have you thought about that? Has anyone thought through that yet?
Yeah, I'll admit I don't spend a ton of time thinking about these distinctions, even though I do consider myself sort of a designer across the age ranges. So I've got projects going on that are looking at embodied learning with preschool kids, for example, and then obviously projects with adults. I mean, I think one thing is that I think we do benefit and we should continue to benefit from the literatures that have sort of evolved even pre-XR around designing for these populations. So the interaction design for children community, for example. I mean, if I was ever gonna make something for a specific, audience of children, I would absolutely look at the literature from that community before trying to do it. Likewise, if I was, designing something for seniors, I would want to make sure that I sort of had an understanding of what has been done previously about working with them. But I think across all those groups, I think it is really important, and Rebecca mentioned this too, about getting input from whoever it is that you're designing for, talking to those users about what are their what are their needs and what are their concerns and limitations and areas of opportunity for that, right? So we a quick example of that is that when we did some augmented mixed reality simulations for middle school students using hand gestures, it's always that question, well, what hand gestures do you want those students to use? And so we thought, well, let's see what hand gestures middle school kids use when explaining these concepts that we want them to explain. So we talked to kids, we interviewed kids, no technology involved. We just asked them, can you explain this science concept to us, and then watch what they did with their hands. And many of those interactions and the gestures we ended up using in these environments were sourced directly from those interviews, because they were telling us this is what we find easy to express these ideas. And so we were able to augment that with the XR technology that we had.
Great. All right, next question. What more could be developed using XR with respect to social learning? I think you started to touch on it, Rebecca, with the facial expressions and kind of reading the nonverbals. Other thoughts you've had? Did the at least in Altspace or the representation, like some don't have arms, some don't have body, like legs. Did that affect? Did that enhance? Did you have a sense?
Well, I mean, the tasks that we were doing in those spaces, I wouldn't say, for instance, leg movements or anything like that. It wasn't important to be able to either visualize that or use those in the particular tasks that we were doing. We were more, I guess, focused on discussion-oriented type activities. I guess I would say, I mean, I'm not aware, maybe there are things out there, but of educational applications that are designed specifically for co-located activity in a virtual reality setting. Maybe there are, but I was just using things that were available commercially, for social interaction and kind of essentially doing what I would be doing in a classroom in those environments. But it would be really cool if there was something a little more tailored to a specific task, that a learning goal that was designed specifically for those environments. But maybe James and Rob are aware of some of those. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, Laura Shackelford is a professor here on campus that does sort of co-located VR archaeology. She's in our archaeology department. And I'll put the link in chat, but she's done a lot of work around like pairs working together at virtual dig sites as part of their lab in a classroom setting. So I'll send the link along, as there's been some initial work out of that that's really interesting.
Yeah, we're seeing some folks in our School of Nursing using the HoloLens for skill training with mannequins, with physical for some more self-directed learning, like you look at a QR code on the mannequin and it pops up and says, do you want to do chest tube insertion? Do you want to do catheterization? And it basically then walks you through step-by-step instructions. So we're seeing some interesting applications there, and they're putting a study together on that now. Okay, maybe we'll take a couple more. We've got maybe about 7, 8 minutes left. In working with students, is there a divide in facility with VR activities among those who are experienced with video games versus those who don't play video games? In other words, does gaming when young give a leg up on higher learning with VR? Have you noted any difference between comfort levels between male and female students?
I'm going to send this one to James. I know he's watched a lot of different users use these platforms recently. So
Yeah. And I will say from our early pilot with VR, we did do some perception surveys as they worked with the technology, and we didn't find like I saw a gender divide there. I have found as I engage with students, especially because with the AR system being so novel to essentially everyone, in some ways that was a little bit of a level playing field, but those that indicated that they were comfortable with VR definitely had that sort of schema booted up in their mind about, okay, I'm doing actions in a simulated environment. I know kind of what to expect in terms of adjusting the headset and things like that. So just the general sort of procedural experiences and the idea of I'm meshing or entering a virtual space. We've seen with the VR pilot, like sometimes just the initial introduction to the VR and the student not experiencing that before, and like with the Quest headsets, we had it set up so that if they left the boundary area, it would turn on the cameras and you could see the classroom, and just moving back and forth between the sim where we wanted them to stay and the camera view was like blowing their mind. And so there was just this extra time to dive into all of that where the VR users were comfortable with that, leveraging controllers and sort of the abstractness of buttons and actions. And I do think there's some help there, but again, when we're leveraging more purposeful interaction schemes and the body-based interaction stuff, I think a lot of that drops away and that levels the playing field a little bit.
Yeah, I will say that a topic that came up in our class was around the headsets themselves and how they seem to be designed for people maybe who have larger bodies, larger head sizes and things, and the weight of them is pretty significant. So, if women in general tend to be smaller, then maybe there could be some issues there with equity of accessibility. I guess also in the class, they self-selected to take the class. I don't really know, if they had video game backgrounds or not, but we did have a lot of students who said they'd never tried VR before. They were just curious about it. So yeah, I'm not sure I can speak to the video game question, but definitely I think there's some work to be done with a headset design to make those more comfortable for everyone.
Yeah, we've noticed more anecdotally just the controllers, like if they've played games before, they understand the joystick and the buttons and sometimes they hold them upside down. So just that piece. But I think after, 1 or 2 sessions, short sessions, it becomes doesn't become a barrier anymore, at least what we've seen. Okay. Does the novelness of unfamiliar VR AR technology impact students? Do you have suggestions for acclimating students to this technology? We touched on that briefly there. Did you use that like Oculus First Steps or any one of those kind of onboarding apps, James or Rob?
I can kind of reflect on the VR prototype we did, which was, and then kind of learning from that, what we did with the HoloLens implementation. So with the VR, again, we were really lucky to have access to those community college teachers. We did at that point had access to like one lab session. So we had, here's VR, here's our system, here's the task. And frankly, we were like, they got engaged with the system and did productive work, but we knew when we got the HoloLenses and we wanted to implement that not only were we jumping into a whole nother interaction scheme, but we wanted to really address that directly. So that's one of the reasons we had 3 sessions. And yeah, the first session they sat with us was really just sort of a meta of here's how the tech is creating these things for you to interact with. You need to keep in mind that there's cameras sensing your hands. So if you're having trouble interacting, think about where your hands are. Or for VR, you could think about like controller position and things like that. And really just adjusting and thinking about the technology. And you're right, there are some for the HoloLens and for the Oculus, there are some nice sort of introductory training apps. And we also wanted to get them into our system too, and get used to the interface across the two and see what's similar and what wasn't. By the time we got to the third session, kind of like you mentioned, Jeremy, with the adjusting of the controllers and stuff, those who were really open to engaging with a hand-tracked based system. At that point, I think we had gotten over that novelty hump, and the people who were comfortable and really engaging with it, or kind of started to identify as the HoloLens user in the group, were really latched onto it. Other people were again, more comfortable for a variety of reasons, COVID included in that, leveraging the tablets and interacting that way. But yeah, I think the novelty, if you can have some time to really just an explicit discussion about the technology, and then like slowly integrate your content into that once you've addressed that a little bit, it doesn't take a lot of sessions to get most people up to speed with what you're doing, at least what we found.
Anything you wanted to add, Rebecca? No? All right, maybe one.
I had a thought earlier, but I've lost it.
Okay, one last quick question, maybe just quick thoughts, and then we'll wrap up here. What are the most effective methods to assess learning outcomes when learning takes place in VR? How do you capture immediate reactions and feedback? Rick, you started to go into those debriefs, like you made time for those debriefs, right?
Yeah, I mean, reflection and debrief is key, I think, to any type of any learning experience, but especially immersive learning experiences. And we did try to structure those to happen right afterward, rather than having students, maybe do the VR on their own time, which we could have done. That could have been like a flipped classroom, have students do VR and then come to class. But we really wanted to put that like in the class time so that it was fresh, but at the same time recognizing it might take time, for students to really absorb and reflect. So again, giving them opportunities for asynchronous reflection through workbook prompts and things like that afterwards as well, were the two ways that we approached it.
Yeah, real quick, I think that this is an enormous area of opportunity to rethink how we do assessment. I mean, the fact that there are still some people, giving these beautiful, engaging, XR experiences to students, and then following it up with, multiple choice tests to see whether or not they got facts of it is just, it's heartbreaking. So we need to be thinking about it. I mean, my sort of sick kind of desire is that we could take all the people who are currently working on developing, algorithms for intelligent tutoring systems to make inferences about how students answer well-structured problems, and move them into this space and say, what are some new creative ways that we can assess what people are doing in virtual reality, what people are doing in augmented reality. We've got in our system, we've tried to look at, well, how do you know when two groups of people are looking at the same thing in the simulation at the same time? I mean, that in itself is such a fertile area of like, oh, that something really productive could come from just noting when that happens, something that teachers could potentially respond to in real time in their instruction. So anyway, great question. Could give a much longer answer to it, but for sure.
This was great. Thank you so much, Rebecca, Rob, James. I really appreciate the time. This is a great kickoff to our fall speaker series, and look forward to staying connected and seeing how the work progresses as you move along, and look forward to seeing everybody back here on October 20th.
Yeah, thanks for the opportunity, and thanks for everyone who joined us today. Lots of great activity in the Slack or in the chat.
Yeah, great question. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Take care.